Okay, we're going to be continuing our work in Chapter 6. By my accounts, after looking back at the videos and some of my notes and stuff, I discovered that this was the last command that we typed, and that is at the top of page 99, and that's where we're going to pick up from. Now, because we're kind of working midstream, and we're working at a command prompt where we may have been creating variables, and I'd like to say I remember it in detail, but frankly, I don't. So we're going to actually try a couple of commands to see what's in memory, what's not, and obviously really nothing should be in memory because at least I've rebooted and I closed my prompts since last week. So part of what we're doing here is just to kind of see what state we're in. Additionally, before you begin your work, be in the habit of creating a version of your work. So this is the one I've been working on, and what I ended up doing is creating a copy, and then I marked it here. Chapter 6 up to page 99, and that way I know this one is good up until that point, so if I mess things up horribly I can always go back to that one. Alright, so if you've done that, go ahead also and open up a prompt, navigate into the project folder where your blog is located. Also bring up your text editor and whatever other tools you might need. Maybe have your PDF up and handy. And I'm going to actually just backtrack a bit here and just kind of review some of the last commands that we typed in and the topics. So just kind of going back. All right, we were working on those many-to-many associations, and just a little refresher on that. In order to create a many-to-many relationship, we actually have to create a table that sits in between that simply holds the IDs between the tables to allow for that link to happen. If you only had a direct connection between the tables, that wouldn't be possible. You need that kind of intermediary in between to allow it to happen. The next thing that we did is we used the prompt to generate a model. Remember, the model is a representation of the data that may or may not involve writing to the database. In this case, we just generated the model and we created a field called name, which is a string, and then we did the migration that allowed us to create this migration file, and I don't know if you guys remember doing that. When we opened up that file, it looked like this. We made a couple of edits to it. Then after we did the edits, we ran rake db migrate. And remember what that does is it goes through all the models and then it builds out the database in the way that's necessary based on whatever changes that we made. In some cases it doesn't make any changes, but in some cases even if you just change one line in one file, it'll go through, read it, and make the adjustment to the database that we asked for. The other thing that we did is we adjusted the article class file, and we added a little bit to it, and we basically put in this declaration here where it says has and belongs to many, and that's kind of the weird terminology they use, but that's the Ruby way of saying many to many. All right, and we did do that edit. I remember doing that one. And then in addition, we went to the category table. Remember, that's the one that sits in between, I believe. I should go back and check it. No, that's the one that sits on the other side. And for that one, we also put in has and belongs to many articles so that it indicates many to many on both ends of the situation. Then to refresh one more thing that we did, we created what we call a seed file. So we went to this particular folder, the database seeds RB file, and what we did is we put in some directives here that allow us to create categories. And you see what we're doing here is we're actually doing that from this one file, and it's not only creating a user, it's also creating the categories. So we're basically taking that category table and we're feeding it the columns, or excuse me, not the columns, but information that's going into the name column. So we're creating categories with those names. Then we ran the command rake db seed, And what that does, just like the DB migrate, it goes to the seed file, it executes whatever commands are present, and then creates that stuff in the database. Now this set of commands here was basically loading up the last article, looking at the categories, and just basically testing a few things. So those things were active in memory, and I remember all these working just fine. Now we're going to be starting from scratch here, so if we get to the point where we're going to be typing in a command and it's reliant on maybe some of the ones that we typed up here, we'll find out in a hurry. But I just wanted to do a little recap so that we have like a clear mindset going into what we're working on here. In an ideal world, I would have finished this last time, because this is just one little short section, and then we're going into the remainder of the chapter. All right, so here we're looking through an additional way to do many-to-many associations, and this is what they're actually calling rich many-to-many associations, and it's really a way to use a bunch of different approaches together, which kind of leverages the many-to-many approach and gives it a little bit more capability. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is we do need to drop to a prompt. So if you don't have your command prompt window open, please open it. I'm going to split my windows here so I can look at the book at the same time. And the first command that we're going to type get this thing to cooperate with me. There we go. Is this generate command. So just reading through it real quick, it says Rails generate model comment. Okay, so that's going to be the model. And then it's going to have a column called article ID. That's an integer. Name, that's a string. Email, that's a string. And the body, which is text. Now, the article ID, if you scroll back up, that's the thing that allows us to make that link from table to table. So really what we're saying here is that there's a foreign key relationship from the primary key in the articles table to the article ID column in the comments table, so that if somebody has an article and you create a comment, you know which article that comment goes with. So that's really kind of what we're doing there. So let's go ahead and execute that command. Give it a second to do its work. All right, and hopefully you have an output that looks somewhat like this. All right, in that output we can see that it created this Ruby file that's in the migration folder. And just, so you see the pattern. Whenever you do one of these generate models, it creates a file in that migration folder with the name that matches what you see here. So you see we're doing a create comment, so that's why comments is plural, because that's going to create a model. And then the RB, of course, is for the Ruby file. It also creates in the app folder the actual comment Ruby file, and then of course it creates test files. And as we get towards the end of the book, we're going to do a little bit of test-driven development, so you can see what that's all about. But in a nutshell, if you're curious about the testing component, basically testing is something people have been doing in programming for a while. But basically, you write code that tests how your application behaves without actually executing the application per se. And that's a pretty common technique. So in other words, like you'll feed data to something and see if it blows up or not before you deploy it and see if it blows up. And it's really considered a good practice. So that's why whenever we do this in an MVC architecture, it automatically creates those components for us. All right, now that we've done the generate model command, now we're going to go ahead and we're going to do a rake db migrate. So let's do that one. Remember what this is doing again, even though we just mentioned it. It's going ahead and it's reading through those database migration files and executing them. So now if we also go to this tool that I've pointed you to, this SQLite browser, we can go ahead and open up our database, and this will just show us that, that what we just did is actually working. Now I know we can do it from a prompt too, but I just find it a little bit easier at times just to have that tool open, and make a couple clicks, and you can see that your work actually happened. And I'm hoping you followed along with the path to get there. If you've been doing the earlier videos, it should be a piece of cake. All right, so the database is open, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to look at the tables that we have. You'll see now we do have a comments table. It is blank. Some of this stuff was already there, but keep in mind what we just did is we created these particular fields. So we did article ID, name, email, and body. Remember, the other three are automatically generated. And I know this is repeat, but I like to repeat it because that way I think it sticks better. ID is automatically generated. That happens in all of the database tables in this architecture. There's also a created column and an updated column. And hopefully everybody's code worked. Now we're going to go dig into the app models folder and find the comments Ruby file. So go to your projects folder, open up your blog application, go to app, go to models, and then we're looking at comment. Open that up in your editor, and you can see right now we have an empty file. I'm just going to kind of pull this down out of the way so I can look at the code as I'm typing. And all we're going to do here is we're just going to put in an association that indicates that it belongs to the article table. So remember what that's doing is we have this article ID, which we know is supposed to be a foreign key relationship to the article table. The problem is, just by virtue of creating the column, it doesn't mean that the association is in place. That's why we come to this file to put in that directive, so we know that whenever we're working with the class comment, which ties to the model comment, which ties to the table comment, we know that it belongs to article. So when we see article underscore ID, it forms that link and that association. I'm doing a Control S to save in my editor. All right, the next file that we need to tweak is the models article RB file. We're going to do essentially the same thing, but just to make the association happen in the other direction. So let's open up that one, and let's look for the differences here. So we have the validation components are in place. We do belong to user, has and belongs to many categories, and the part that we need to add is has many comments. The last portion looks fine. Go ahead and save it. So now we have the association happening in both directions from both Ruby files from one table to the other. All right. Another thing that we need to work on is the user file. That's in the same folder. And the tweaks that we need to make here are slightly different. Let me scroll up on the code here. All right, so in this situation, we already have a couple of associations in place. And this is one of the spots where some people were having problems, because when we were doing the earlier edits, they switched from one version of the syntax and then did a different version of the syntax. If you were just editing part of it, it might have broken there. And I think we covered that in the video pretty well. But this is what it should look like before we do this edit here at the top of page 101. All right, so make sure that this statement is matching this statement here, that the syntax is the same and that all the punctuation and special characters and stuff are corresponding. And to my eyes, it looks fine. Now, we're going to do a similar type of thing here that's going to tie together the comments and the articles. So we're going to create a new line, and I'm going to indent 2 spaces. And let's read this one through. Once again, this is indicates a has many relationship, so it's going to be one to many when it says that. So in other words, one article can have many comments. Now there's a little directive in here that's a little bit different, which is this one here. So through basically gives us the capability, how do I say this, to kind of more elegantly use some syntax to refer to the connection. That's the most concise way I can say it, I guess. All right, so the syntax here is replies. All right, and think about that. When you make a comment on something in like a social format, very often you can reply to that particular comment. So very much in the same way that we can have multiple comments on one article, we can also have multiple replies to one comment. So you see the logic. All right. Now that operates through articles and also indicates that there's a source which comes from the comment. So that is all relative to the reply. So let's go ahead and save that one. Do a little Control S. All right, and now we're going to run this series of commands here to show that everything is working. So the first command is going to be basically setting, we're grabbing a user out of the user table and setting it equal to user, lowercase. So we're grabbing the first user. All right. That obviously didn't work. What am I doing wrong, folks? Yeah, I got to start the Rails console. They didn't tell us that, did they? You know, here's another one of these spots where I should probably throw a little comment in. So, kind of keep notes for the future. It's kind of a good habit to keep that there. Maybe I can move it a little out of the way. All right, so let's do Rails console. All right, now we can type our command. So user equals user.first. All right, and if we take a look here, we should see information that looks like this. Remember, with all the tinkering that we're doing to the databases, ideally all our databases look the same, but you know, I've been goofing around with stuff, so you might get a different response. Then let's type this next command, which is user replies empty. And before you press enter, try to think about what's going on here. In this Ruby file that we just adjusted, we set up this replies item, and now we're checking to see if users replies equals empty. Now the other thing that you might want to check is jump over to the database real quick and pull up, first of all, articles. See, there's nothing here called replies. Even in categories, nothing. If we look at the comments table, there's no replies listed here. You see that? And in fact, if I go through all of them, you're going to see there's no replies anywhere. So what is replies? I mean, we're kind of dealing with it like it's this object, and in a way it is, and it's all relative to that one file that we just did. So when we hit enter here, what are we going to get as a response? True, it is empty. There is nothing there. We haven't put anything there. So what we're going to do now is we're going to load up one of the articles. So we're going to type, I'm actually going to type it this time, article equals user.articles.first. So it's going to look for the user that we pulled out. Remember, the user is the first user. We're looking for that person's articles, whatever articles they created, and then we're looking for the first of those articles. So press enter, and you can see that it pulled in article called associations and all the information that goes with. So hopefully that one worked for you. The next one that we're going to type in is we're going to say article.comments.create, and this is probably where I should do a little copy pasting probably. And as has been our habit, I'm using Notepad++ to kind of buffer the commands so we can make sure everything ends up on the same line. So we don't need all of that because I have most of it. And not to be paranoid, but I'm arrowing back just to make sure it all got in there okay. It seems all right. Let's go ahead and press enter, and let's get an error message. You guys get an error message too? All right. I'm running this one here. Yeah, I'm gonna. I think I did, but you know what? No harm done in checking. So I'm going to go ahead and just copy this again and run the command. It failed, so it's not a big deal to try again. All right, so I was just double checking a couple settings here, but I pasted this back into Notepad++, and I'm going to clean up the command. I just want to make sure it pastes properly, so let's copy that back over to our prompt and paste, and press enter. All right, that time it worked. So there was a slight little typo in there somewhere. All right, so basically what we did here is that article that we just stored. So it's that user number one, their articles, their first article. Now we're adding a comment to it. That comment is coming from somebody with the name of guest, with an email address and some actual comment. Next, we're going to run this little directive, and this one says user.replies. And then you can see by typing that command, it goes through and it looks at all the stuff that got posted with the comment. So it says comment ID 1, article ID 11. It indicates who did the response and showed what the comment actually was, plus all the other fields that go with. So it spits out that whole bit of information that's stored in the database at this point. All right, and then we're going to run the next command, which is user replies size, and that we can anticipate should be 1 as shown in the book. Okay, so we've been successful so far in this chapter. We're moving on to the next topic area, and that is using the find tools. Some of this, you're going to see there's some SQL-like syntax that we're going to be using at this point, and you can see that one of the first things we're going to use is what they call the where method, and that does pull directly from SQL syntax. So something like when you probably learned how to do your very first query, you would select something from something, a table usually, where certain criteria is met. So that's why we use that keyword, because that'll be the thing that helps us to set the criteria. Now take a look at the syntax on this. This is kind of interesting. Very easy to understand. We're just going to paste it. It says article.where, so remember that's a method. You can tell also because there's parentheses after it, where the title is advanced active record. And hopefully our database has an article like that, and it seems to. So, now if you didn't, if you were messing with your database, it might not come back with that answer, but then you could always run a different command to find one of the articles that you do have. All right, now it seems to me that they're reiterating the same command again, but the thing that they're doing different here, if you look really closely at the detail, is they're changing the syntax from using the Ruby style indicator for a column name, which is the colon title, and then they're just saying title and then equals, just the same way we would do it in SQL. Yeah, double quotes the beginning and the end of the line, that's right. And then the thing that we're searching for has single quotes. So once again, using a SQL convention. So let's go ahead and hit the prompt window here and press enter, and you can see we got the exact same result. So if you're more comfortable using a SQL style syntax, you absolutely can. Now, one of the reasons why we go ahead and use this capability, and why this capability even exists inside of this environment, is because SQL, hopefully you've learned in your studies, that is a very robust tool for doing, for working with data, and there's a whole lot that you can do with it. Some of those things that you can do inside of a SQL, environment, or using SQL syntax, you can't exactly do with some of these abstraction tools, so you're forced then to actually use the actual SQL commands to make things happen. So that's what we're doing here. We're going to copy this little snippet and basically run a little bit more complicated query. So this one's searching for something created at a certain time, or the body is not like model. So now the question is, what the heck does that mean? Not like, right? We're basically saying find something that isn't, right? So like the inverse. So if you find something that is like model, what are the percent signs in here? Do you guys know? Remember your database stuff? Wildcards. Actually, if you read the next paragraph or two down somewhere, it says it. But that's how, like, basically in SQL, when we want to say a wildcard, meaning that if the word model exists in it, whatever comes before and whatever comes after can be anything. That's what that means. Okay, so basically we're looking for something that doesn't have the word model in it somewhere. All right, so that I think that's kind of interesting. Now, the amount of stuff that you get back, of course, is going to be relative to the stuff in your database. All right. Let's run this next one. And this command is really similar if you look at it. One was an or, and this one is an and. So now with an and, remember, two conditions need to be true, and I'm guessing that they're not, so that's why we're getting back the empty square brackets. On the book, they just give you the square brackets. We do have them, they're right here, but in this version of Ruby, apparently they're giving a little bit more verbose output, which isn't a bad thing at all. All right, they have a little interesting thing here, and I don't know if this article link works, but let's just give it a shot. Have you guys ever heard about this concept of what they call SQL injection? You ever heard that? And just read this little Wikipedia entry here. It says, SQL injection is a code injection technique used to attack data-driven applications in which nefarious SQL statements are inserted into an entry field for execution. So what that basically means is if you don't set up your site correctly, somebody can come in, type some stuff into a form, it gets put into your database, and then depending on the kind of thing that you're doing with your database, there's a possibility that that script could execute and do something malicious, and they call that SQL injection. And you know that you have to really know what that is and how to prevent it. A lot of systems were very, very vulnerable to it. And I know a lot of you have been in classes with me or Christian or Christopher where you've been working with certain applications. I'm trying to think of, like, you know, PHP and some of those classes where we're working with databases where it's absolutely possible to insert stuff in. And, you know, we were working on a fairly primitive level and weren't really worried about it. But when you look at a product like WordPress, right, and a lot of us are working with WordPress, WordPress in the past, and I'm trying to think of what version it was, maybe version 1 point something or version 2, was very susceptible to this. They didn't really have it locked down very much. I think when they got to version 3 and 4, they kind of got rid of most of those problems. But it can allow you to do some pretty terrible things if you don't set up your stuff correctly. So it's just kind of an interesting little sideline. I encourage you to read about it. It's good to know about these little security aspects of things. All right, the next command that we're going to try, let's just paste it in and see what it says. Okay, so here we're looking where published at, so whenever it was published, is less than question mark. Now the question mark is kind of a strange thing, you know, and really what this indicates, and you can see right down here in the paragraph, it's a way that we would normally in that spot put in, you know, the certain time that we're looking for, but right now we don't know what that is. So we're kind of leveraging this aspect, and of course if we do this, what should come back? Hypothetically, everything, really. So let's see what happens in the window. Now it comes back empty. And the reason it's coming back empty, if you read this, it says, instead of writing the date, you put in a question mark at the spot where you normally write the value you want to find. The where method takes the second element in the array, so it treats it, so all the stuff that's in there it's pulling back is treating it all as array elements, and replaces it with where the first question mark appears. So it actually switches it. And one little neat way to see it in action is where we take this. Can you say that again? Okay. One of our students here, Ryan, is indicating that he did have something returned from that statement, as likely you should. Like if you were following the instructions more closely than I and weren't deleting and changing database contents, you should get back articles that actually fit that that profile. Now, yeah. Now my database, the way it's behaving is not necessarily the way the book's behaving because I've messed with it so much. All right, but now we're going to take that same command and instead of using the Ruby syntax, we are now going to apply this little method at the end that, notice what it does, it changes it to a SQL statement. Now that's really cool. So what this is telling you is that it doesn't necessarily have to be executed in that fashion, but what happens is it takes that statement and converts it to select articles from articles where published at is less than whatever the current date and time is. Now, that just converted it to SQL. Didn't actually execute it, did it? No, it didn't actually execute it, so that's an important distinction too. All right, let's try this other one. In this case, I'm just going to go ahead and run it. Okay, so in this case we're looking at created at question mark, where we're trying to figure out what the last one was that was created. And you know, I should probably look at my database. That might be a pertinent thing to do here. And what I'm looking for is articles. And sure enough, the last article I created is ID number 11, associations, active record, etc. So that if I come back to my prompts and I look, ID 11, titled associations, etc. So it's pulling back the right thing. And it seems like, you know, when you're working on this stuff and something works, it's like, woohoo, right? It's wonderful. All right, so let's go ahead and paste this one. This last one here has a little bit more complicated directive. Of course, it's got a little or in there, and then it's also doing a like, and once again, it's still using the question mark in there, and it's using that now to do a query. So hopefully you're able to pull back most likely the same article, and maybe you guys get multiple ones, but it should be just the last one. All right, we were just looking at how many pages we have left and gasped a little bit because it looks like we got, what, 16, I think Nick said. So we better get busy here. All right, so we're going to try this next command. I'm going to try this, I think. All right, so this is another one of these little searches here, and hopefully you're pulling back the same information. Now here's where we start to kind of like unwind some of these features here. The one that we're trying right now is called an association proxy, and it's kind of something that you can do in other languages too, and basically it's all about chaining. You can see they have right here. But this allows us to kind of like run multiple things simultaneously. So what we're doing is user first, articles, all. So the first users, articles, and all of them. All right, so you can see it gave us back. I think that's the only one that user has apparently. So maybe your database is a little different. No, I don't think so. I'm being told I skipped over something. We did these, and then we did this. Yep, I just did this one. I'm being told I skipped stuff. But that's not the case. This next message here, or command here, that's not something we need to type. So nothing to worry about there. Now, there's a number of different methods that you can invoke. Here's a very brief list. Some of them basically imitate SQL statements, so if you know what a where or order or limit and joins, all those things, it's basically the same thing. So let's see if we can rifle through these commands real quick. Let's do an article all. That should show all of them. If we want to sort them ascending by title, we do article order title ASC. I'm just assuming that they're ordered, that it worked correctly. With this command, we use the limit. It basically forces it to only return one record. In this particular command, we are ordering by title descending, so reverse alphabetical, but only up to 2 articles. And I'm sure that it did it correctly, so I'm not going to read through that. I'm trying to be efficient with time here. Alright, so now we're going to run this command, and you can probably anticipate what it's going to do. We're going to type category all, and that should give us a complete listing of all the different categories that we have. And you can see output should look something like this. Alright, so they're making a little indication here that when we're returning the categories that they're basically coming back according to their primary key ID. But we want to make sure that they're always listed alphabetically. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to add a little change to the category RB file. Might still be open. Nope, I guess we never opened that today. So let's open that file. That is in the blog app models folder. So you can see right there, app model category. And then we're going to make a little adjustment. And basically we're going to throw in this little expression. Alright, and basically what this is doing is it's telling it to order it by name. So go ahead and save it. Alright, now notice that they are asking us to do a reload, so we're going to type that reload command so that everything works. Alright, so it worked. And now we're going to run category all again. And now if you look, it should be ordered alphabetically. And I'm just taking it at face value. We got event, music, programming. Yeah, so it seems to be working properly. Another file we're going to alter is the article RB file. That one might be open too. And we're going to make a couple of tweaks here. Let's try to get that all into view. So once again, we're going to set up a scope. So really, what we're doing is in essence, we're building in queries right into these app model files that will execute on their own because that's the way we're building them. So we're looking at these expressions. So it says where articles published at is not null. So it's got to have a published at date, and one is for the published version and one is for the draft version. So we're kind of indicating that. And if you think of like how WordPress operates, where you can like create something and you can save it as a draft, or you can actually publish it so it's visible, and that's what this is doing. So this is helping with that process. So save that file. Now it looks to me like they're having us tweak the same file again. I'm not sure why they didn't have us do it in one fell swoop, but must have a reason. So now they're adding one more line of code here. And this one, the scope is recent. And here I can clean this stuff up. So in terms of what they're considering recent, you can even just read the syntax. It says 1 week ago to date. So basically within the past week, they were considering it a recent article. So we have a published mode, a draft mode, and a recent mode. Recent, that's one of those things too. When you're working with like a blogging engine, very often you'll have a page that lists all the recent posts, and it'll, usually by default the most recent thing will be at the top, kind of like the way email works. All right, so if you fix that one, save it. Right. Once again, we're adding to the file. And now we're putting in another little directive. Notice this one's a little different though. Check the syntax on this. So we're putting in something called where title. And what we're doing is we're in essence setting up kind of like a placeholder where we can, put in certain information, where the title is meeting certain criteria. And we're building that right into the file too. So I think that's kind of neat to have that capability. All right, so now that we've done that work, make sure all those files that you've been editing were saved. So make sure that none of your little icons are red if you're using Notepad++. Let's drop to the prompt. Let's do a reload. And now we're going to run this command, article published. All right, and notice, remember, whenever you see the ... that it indicates there's a whole bunch of them that are being placed there. You can also run article draft. Now keep in mind how this is working. That is coming from the article RB file, and by virtue of the fact that we're going .draft, it's finding that scope here, and then it's executing that piece of code. Just make that connection as you're hitting that key to execute the command. And so far so good. Everything is working just fine, as well it should. So now we're going to run the recent command. We're just basically trying each one of them. All of them are working. Now mine came back blank on this one because I hadn't created anything within the last week. You guys might get the same thing if you haven't been working on this actively. All right. Now we're trying that last directive, where title, and now we're basically checking where the title is containing that word one. So let's run that one, and you can see that it's pulling back one with the title 1 in it, so that's working just fine as well. One more to try, and this is article where title is active. And we should have one about active record, I assume, and indeed, introduction to active record. So we're able to just basically create a little custom finding method. And it's not technically it's not even a method, but it's a named scope, basically, is what that is. All right. So next thing we're going to do is we're going to start playing with some of these validations. And we've already done a little bit of this validates presence of, so we're just making sure that a field is filled in. So if that's not filled in, it's going to throw some sort of an error. But now you're going to see that we're going to add a couple of other components to it: confirmation of and acceptance of. Now these are going to be pretty important, because you can even tell from the way that they're doing this. This obviously relates to like a user login. So the person has to log in, the password must confirm correctly, and they have to click the little box that says I accept the terms of service. Those are pretty common little activities. Now the language does have validations that are built in. We've already used some of them, but we have these little options we can add, so we can have messages that output to the screen. So if, let's say, a password is too long, you can send out a message saying too long. Or it also can have this little option that'll tell it when it's going to validate. It's going to validate when it's created. All All right, so what we want to do now is we want to just double check our file here. And notice this is the same file we've been working on. And what we're trying to do is, it says the default message is can't be blank. All right, so if we want to adjust that, did they put that in here, or am I just overlooking it? Oh yeah, okay, so right, that basically what this is saying is that if there is no message declared, it's going to put its own message in which says can't be blank. I was looking for a deeper meaning than that, but there isn't. So, all right. The other thing that we can do is we can validate that value is actually unique. So that's useful. For example, like you don't want like 2 users with the same username. That would be a good example of that. So if we look under user RB, that's also in the models folder. I think I have that one open. All right, so in that particular file, we have to add a little line of validation which validates the uniqueness. So make sure that it's a unique value. It has to be a unique email address because remember that's what we're using for a login. The rest of the stuff you won't have to touch. Save your work. All right, so here, you know, this is an example, mind you. This is not something that we're typing in. But what they're indicating is that you can check to make sure that, for example, in this case, that teacher ID is unique and that there's a scope that applies to it as well. So the teacher ID is unique relative to the semester ID and the class ID. That's just a demonstration. All right. Another thing that we can validate is actually the length of the email. So we can make sure that we're within a certain range. This is going into that same file. And the syntax of this is pretty easy to understand too. It doesn't take much to figure it out. It says validates the length of email. It's got to be within 5 to 50 characters. So why 5 characters is the minimum? 1 character before the @ sign, and then dot, well, I'd say .com, but it's dot 2 letters because the minimum size for a top-level domain is 2 letters. Because there's like .uk or .co or that kind of thing. So it's a minimum of 5 characters, but no longer than 50. And I don't know if like systems actually have a restriction of 50 characters. I know that was an issue in the past, but save your work. All right, so they have a bunch of different methods for validating, and they have a list of them here, and you can read up on all those, and they all make sense if you examine them. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to do a little bit of regular expression. You guys remember what a regular expression is? You should all say yes because you should have encountered it at least a few times in your studies. But a regular expression basically defines the format for the data being entered. So this string that they're using here has, you know, basically some directives. Notice the @ sign, and then it basically is saying that we can kind of enter whatever we want before the @ sign, kind of enter whatever we want before, but ultimately there has to be a dot in there, and then there has to be a top-level domain at the end. I mean, that's a very simplified version of it. This isn't a class in regular expressions, but if you really wanted to write one, you'd have to do a little bit of investigation. All right, and as we type this regular expression, it triggers in my brain that there's a problem with the expression, so I'm bringing over the course shell page for this unit. You can see at the very bottom here, So it says listing 626, and this is listing 626 on page 111, which it is. It's telling us that the regular expression is not quite right. So take a look at the syntax of what we have now, wherever it happens to be, right there. And then compare it with this. It's just slightly off, so I'm going to take the code that's on the page here. So I'm going to copy basically this portion of it, and I'm going to replace this expression. So you see how it's slightly different. Slightly different. Go ahead and save that. And this is one of those that if you didn't read it in the course shell, you'll kind of be, getting frustrated basically in terms of what's available. All right. Please notice also that there's one coming up on page 113 too, so we're just kind of aware of it. Ahead of the curve instead of behind the curve. And it's kind of like the benefit here too of the fact that when we did this last year, we found out the hard way how to fix this stuff and had to actually make all little tweaks, combination of reading errata and fixing code. So you guys are kind of benefiting from that. All right, let's keep moving here. Another tweak to the same file. Now we're adding the password confirmation. And that just gets added right below this line. So it not only validates that we typed it, but it actually is accepted, that it's the right password. Once again, save your work. Now we got some validations to do in some other files as well. Let's go to the article RB file. In this file, let's do a little comparison. We have these two already. We have all the associations. We have the need to plug in for power. Hold on a moment.